We're talking about ethics, and it's our focus or our bias is the trial by the media. Ladies and gentlemen, there's two things. There's a trial and there's law on the one hand, and there's ethics. Now, over the last 100 years, the law hasn't changed much. It's been pretty much what we know today. Media, on the other hand, has changed. In my long life in this world, I've seen media changed quite many times. In fact, we see media changing every day. It's changing as we speak. If you take ethics, on the other hand, that's not something that's supposed to change. I always think of ethics as something of a tree. And that tree remains steady, it remains firm, notwithstanding the direction of the wind. And that's what ethics is about. I was very recently struck by a photograph of Oscar Pistorius. He was in the dock, the court dock, and we had media, vast amounts of photographers taking pictures of him. And all he could do is just surrender to the clicks of the cameras, to the gazing eyes, to the piercing eyes. And he had his head bowed down and his hands behind him. And he surrendered to that. And it reminded me of Sarah Butman when she was exhibited at various places, very much against her will and very much being something she could do nothing about. And this is obviously a very difficult conversation that we're having, because on the one hand, as lawyers, we say, well, justice must be done in public. In fact, it would not be in the interest of justice to have anybody prosecuted and sentenced in secret. But we wouldn't want to have a situation where Oscar Pistorius, for example, we hear that he's shot and killed his girlfriend and we never see him again, and next thing we hear that he's been sentenced to 5 years. So quite clearly there's this requirement that justice must be seen to be done. In fact, our Constitution, Section 34, has recognized this need, and we've entrenched this, and we've said that any person who has a dispute that can be resolved by the application of the law must have that dispute settled in an open public hearing that is fair. So quite clearly, we've gone some way at not only recognizing what is known, what we know as the public requirement. This is not just a new thing. It exists in Europe, it exists in Africa. To this day, when you have a dispute, that dispute in African jurisprudence is adjudicated by the chief in public, in an open area where everybody can have access to it. So we quite agree, and we must agree that it is an essential requirement that justice must not only be done, but it must be seen to be done. Now, the media plays a significant role, because without the media, we are unable to dispense this very important requirement of having media, of having the law publicized. But there is a risk, and that risk is, as I said earlier, media has changed. It's not what it used to be. Now, if we then have this changing media, how do we mitigate against that risk? How do we mitigate against that risk? We know that it's more instantaneous. Something happens now, if I trip and fall now, it'll be on Twitter. It'll be publicized all over. So it's instantaneous, but most importantly, it's not formal. It's not done by journalists. It's done by everybody. Anybody is in a position to receive and impart information. So the risks become even greater. The ethics require us to bear in mind that there's an accused person, and what often happens is when you're accused of a crime, it doesn't matter if you're sentenced or not. The bottom line is the fact that you're accused of the crime. That on its own is a big thing, and that on its own can be detrimental to your rights as a person. So these are the important things. And the threat lies when media goes beyond just the reporting of fact, when we actually go and extend to making findings of guilt. I'm going to give you an example. When you look at this picture here, what do you see? It's a big bad monster. It's bad. It's a bad monster. That is not a good thing. It's a bad connotation. But when you look at that man and they call him the Marimole monster, then you got to go back and you say, monster? Johan Kotta. That's not reporting. That is going beyond the mandate of reporting on a matter. And that's where we're most threatened. as lawmakers and as citizens of the country. And this is what we need to implore ourselves to do. When you think of justice and you think of journalists, what simply happened is people, unlike lawyers, when we approach a matter, we apply jurisprudence. We look at it and we say, what are the principles? It's regardless of how I feel. When you look at the danger that I'm warning against, you have somebody who's writing an article, somebody who carries with him perception. And with that perception comes bias. And that bias causes us to reach one conclusion or another. We might look at the very same thing, but we might have different conclusions. The law, on the other hand, best represented by Lady Justice, is founded on the principle that justice must be meted out objectively. It must be meted out equally. It must not. It does not have regard for your race, your color, your personal circumstances, your financial circumstances, and that's what justice is about. And how do we then overcome this difficulty? We have this difficulty of a strong recognition, because when I say the dangers of media are twofold. When they make findings of guilt or otherwise, one. When they go beyond just stating and documenting the fact and go as far as recording opinion and giving their own opinions. Those are the danger. And you gotta remember one very important thing. I'm not advocating against freedom of speech. In fact, I'm one of the patrons of freedom of speech. But this is the risk that we must bear in mind. We overcome this hurdle when we appreciate that there must be a separation of functions. The judiciary, on the one hand, is responsible for the application of the law. The media, on the other hand, is responsible for the reporting of that. And of course, I do appreciate that sometimes there is an interplay between these two functions, which necessitate and probably induces one to succumb to the pressure of doing the other function. So you have the media, the media person succumbing to wanting to render opinion and make findings of guilt or otherwise. One very important thing, or at least two very important things, must be borne in mind. The first is the very important core of our law is that everybody is assumed innocent until proven guilty. And the second thing is if somebody is asked for a comment and they say no comment, we cannot draw from that or insinuate from that that they must be guilty. These are the two very important things, and this would cause us to achieve a minimum standard of ethics. I say minimum because we could never completely achieve 100%, because then we run the risk of encroaching upon the right to freedom of expression, a right all of us are born with, a right we should never relinquish. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.